The flight management part of the FMGC performs four main functions: navigation, based on accurate position; flight planning; performance prediction and optimization; management of the displays. Accurate position computation is one of the essential functions of the FM part of the FMGC. Each FMGC computes its own aircraft position, FM position, from a mixed IRS position and a computed radio position or a GPS position. The system then selects the most accurate position, considering the estimated accuracy and the integrity of each positioning equipment. The FMGC computes a mix IRS position from the three IRSs. If one IRS fails, each FMGC uses only one IRS, onside IRS or IRS-3. Each IRS computes a hybrid position that is a mix IRS GPS position, called GPIRS. Only one of the three GPIRS positions is selected by the system, according to its figure of merit and priority logic. If the GPIRS data does not comply with an integrity criteria, the GPS mode is rejected and the radio position updating is used. GPS primary lost is displayed on ND and MCDU scratchpad. Each FMGC uses on-side nav aids to compute its own radio position. The nav aids, which are automatically auto-tuned, can be DME DME, VOR DME, DME ILS, LOC DME, ILS approach selected, VOR ILS, LOC DME ILS approach selected. Each FMGC computes a vector from its mix IRS position to the radio or GPS position. This vector is called bias. The bias is updated continuously if radio or GPS position is available. If the radio or GPS position is lost, the bias is memorized and added to the mix IRS position to compute the FM position. Note, at takeoff, the FM position is updated to the runway threshold position memorized in the database. Depending on the navigation mode used by the system, IRS GPS, IRS DME DME, IRS VOR DME, or IRS only, the FMGC computes an estimated position error, EPE. The EPE is then compared to the required navigation performance, RNP, defined by the airworthiness authorities as a nominal error tolerated within a flying area, TMA, or along a given flight plan leg. If the EPE is lower than RNP, accuracy is high. If the EPE is higher than RNP, accuracy is low. When the accuracy switches from high to low, a message, NAV Occur Downgrade, is displayed on ND and on MCDU scratchpad. When the GPS function is lost, the crew must check the position accuracy using raw data information if available. The position accuracy cross-check using raw data information has to be done periodically during the flight, unless GPS is primary, systematically when GPS primary lost message comes up, systematically when NAV Occur Downgrade message comes up. Keep in mind that high-low messages are computed on estimated data. Therefore, even if low is displayed, the accuracy check may be positive. For flight planning, the pilot inserts the following data into the FMGS via the MCDU. The lateral part of the flight plan. The vertical part of the flight plan, speed, time, altitude constraints, or step climb. In fact, two flight plans can be inserted in the FM. A primary one, used for the legs to be flown, and a secondary one, used to prepare an alternative departure or arrival or a diversion, which can be activated by the pilot whenever required. The Flight Management System, or FM, uses two databases to perform its computations, a navigation database and a performance database. The Navigation Database, or NAV database, contains all the necessary information for the lateral flight plan, such as routes, airways, VORs, non-directional beacons, waypoints, and airports. The navigation database is updated every 28 days, and its currency and validity is checked on this page during the pre-flight. Notice there is an active database and a secondary or second database. The secondary second database is either the previous or the next database. Databases are loaded two at a time, so that if the first one expires away from a maintenance base, the pilot can activate the second one before departure the next day. Warning: never activate the second database in flight, as all current active data would be lost. The Performance Database, or PERF database, contains the aircraft performance model and is used to optimize the flight plan and to obtain predictions such as ETAs, EFOB, etc.
The change code is only displayed in the pre-flight and done phases. When the code has been inserted, the idle and performance factors turn to blue. This allows the engineering team to modify these factors in order to take engine and aircraft aging into account and to adapt fuel predictions to actual fuel consumption. Note: a positive idle factor gives an earlier top of descent, and a negative one delays the top of descent. The performance factor relates to a percentage, which means that the airline flight operations have evaluated a fuel deviation from the basic performance model. Clearing the code will lock the change.
The lateral flight plan includes departure, en route, arrival, alternate. These elements are defined by waypoints and legs. The FMGC automatically strings the legs in sequence. When flying in navigation mode, navigation managed by the FMGC, the aircraft is guided on a leg called active leg, defined by a from and a to waypoint. The to waypoint is depicted in white on the MCDU and on the ND as well, in the top right-hand corner.
During pre-flight, the first thing that we do is confirm the correct information on the status page. So, the loaded database of FM1 and FM2 must be identical, and the stored data added by the previous crew may be cleared, as shown. We are then ready to begin programming the route of flight. This is called initializing the flight plan. This initialization of the flight plan is done through the init page A. We will call it For You. The pilot enters the flight plan in either three ways: by inserting an origin-destination pair and then manually selecting a departure, waypoints, airways and an arrival, or by inserting a company route name stored in the database, or by sending a request for an active flight plan initialization, CFANS course.
The flight plan once inserted can be modified by two types of revisions: lateral revisions, which have an immediate effect on the active flight plan; lateral revisions that lead to a temporary flight plan. These revisions are selectable from the left keys on the MCDU.
A lateral revision at present position, PPOS, allows the access to the Fix Info page. On this Fix Info page, if a reference is entered as shown, it is also shown on the associated ND. Then a radial, or a radius can be inserted or a beam prompt can be selected, as here. After computation, the predictions are shown, and if now the associated key is pressed again, an interception point will be added on the flight plan.
The Direct To function is an immediate effect lateral revision, which allows the aircraft to fly from the present position directly to a waypoint, with A-beam points displayed along the track if A-beam PTS is selected, or to intercept an inbound or outbound radial to from this waypoint. If the waypoint does not belong to the flight plan, it has to be inserted via the scratch pad. Waypoints which can be inserted are waypoints from the database or waypoints which are defined by the crew: place, bearing, distance, place, bearing, place, bearing. Deleting a waypoint in the flight plan will create a flight plan discontinuity in the active flight plan. Adding a waypoint in the flight plan will create a flight plan discontinuity. Using a lateral revision at origin, the pilot can insert or modify the takeoff runway, the SID, and the en route transition through the departure revision.
The en route transitions are the various possible trajectories defined between the last waypoint of the SID and the first en route waypoint. There is no transition available in this example.
A lateral revision at destination, line select key 6 left, gives access to the arrival data. The runway and the type of the approach can be chosen, as well as the star.
The via and the en route transition, if any. Approach vias are the various possible trajectories defined between the last point of the star and the first point of the approach. The revision at any waypoint, here at the from waypoint or PPOS, allows the pilot to select the offset prompt. That displays the offset page, where he may define a lateral offset to the left or to the right of the active flight plan. Also, defaulted indications are displayed, like the start waypoint, and they can be modified by a new selection. The offset value inserted is in nautical miles.
Once the offset has been inserted, the initial flight plan appears as a dotted line. A lateral revision at a waypoint allows the pilot to insert into the active flight plan up to 5 segments of airways starting at the revised waypoint. The Airways page is accessed by the line select key 5 right on the waypoint lateral revision page. The revision is done for each segment by first inserting its airway identification, and then by inserting its ending point. After the insertion in the flight plan is completed, some cleaning may be required. A holding pattern can be inserted from a revised waypoint. Using a database hold at, the parameters of the holding pattern are stored in the navigation database. Using a computed hold at, the parameters of the holding pattern are defaulted to predetermined values which can be modified. Once a holding pattern is inserted in the flight plan, it is initially not taken into account by the FMGC for prediction computation, as the system does not know if the pattern will be flown. Once entering the holding pattern, the system considers that only one pattern will be flown. Prior to entering the holding pattern, if managed speed is active and navigation mode engaged, the target speed will automatically be set to the computed holding speed. Or, if the speed is selected, a message, Set Hold Speed, will be displayed on the MCDU and PFD. The holding speed is the lowest of maximum endurance speed, ICAO limit holding speed, speed constraint, if any. The FMGC predicts the latest estimated time at which the aircraft must exit the holding pattern and the estimated amount of fuel so as to fly to destination according to fuel policy. Extra fuel equals 0. This revision allows the pilot to select an alternate airport. Several alternate airports may be stored in the database. The alternate page displays the track, distance, and extra fuel corresponding to the different alternate airports. This assists the pilot in choosing the alternate airport according to weather conditions or fuel considerations. A lateral revision allows the pilot to initiate a diversion to the alternate by selecting the alternate flight plan from any revised waypoint belonging to the active flight plan. A flight plan discontinuity will be displayed between the revised waypoint and the first waypoint of the alternate flight plan. The vertical flight plan is defined by strategic data affecting the overall flight plan, tactical data affecting a given phase of flight, weather data. This data is either inserted by the crew or stored in the performance database.
The strategic data is idle, performance factor, cost index, cruise flight level and temperature, tropopause, wind or trip wind, zero fuel weight CG, block fuel.
The flight plan is divided into flight phases: pre-flight, takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, approach, go-around, done. Each phase is characterized by its target speed profile: V2 plus 10, econ climb, cruise, descent speed, Mach, V approach. The speed profile is also called managed speed profile. The vertical flight plan includes vertical constraints assigned at waypoints, altitude and/or speed, which are stored in the database and entered manually by the crew. Another constraint, the requested time of arrival, or RTA, at the revised waypoint may be entered by the crew. Also part of the vertical flight plan are constant Mach segments, defined by a desired Mach value and its associated starting point.
The vertical flight plan also includes weather data inserted by the crew, temperature and wind for cruise, wind for climb and descent, and also on the approach performance page.
The FMGC optimizes the cost of operation computing econ speed, Mach, for each phase of flight. These speeds, Mach, are computed as a function of gross weight, GW, cost index, CI, cruise flight level, FL, winds, temperature models and actual ones, performance data. Cost index, CI, is the ratio of flight time cost to fuel cost. It is used to compute the best econ speed, or Mach. CI equals 0 corresponds to minimum fuel consumption, or maxi range. CI equals 999 corresponds to minimum time. Additionally, the optimization function provides the following data: maneuvering speed for takeoff, approach, and go-around, OSF. Approach speed and VLS in landing configuration. Optimum flight level and recommended max altitude. The optimum flight level is the one at which the aircraft incurs the lowest cost for given flight plan, GW, and CI. Note, these terms will be discussed in more details in the performance course. Takeoff speeds V1, VR, V2, as well as the flex takeoff temperature or DRT takeoff level are manually inserted by the crew in the MCDU. The FMGC computes predictions for the primary and secondary flight plan whenever the lateral vertical flight plan are completed and when all strategical and tactical data is inserted. These predictions comprise top of climb, TC, and top of descent, TD, fuel, speed change, etc.
Predictions are provided on navigation display by symbols in the current active autopilot modes. If navigation mode is active, they are displayed along the active flight plan. If heading track mode is active, they are displayed along the track line. Decel point. Altitude constraint, amber if predicted missed, white if disregarded. Speed change. Interception point of the descent profile. Top of climb, level off. Top of descent, start of climb. The PFD provides the guidance targets on each dedicated scale: speed target, vertical deviation, altitude target, heading or track target. Note, for non-precision approach, a lateral deviation is shown. If on MCDU progress page, the RNP has been set to a value at or below 0.3 nautical mile.
Rules regarding FM navigation and flight planning. Rule 1. Cross-check the FM navigation accuracy. The FM position accuracy is essential for the proper functioning and validity of all FMS functions. Thus, cross-check FM position accuracy periodically, except when GPS is primary. Cross-check it whenever GPS primary lost or nav occur downgrade messages come up on ND. Cross-check it whenever a doubt arises on the validity of the FM position. Principle: compare the bearing distance computed by the FM to a beacon with the bearing distance provided by raw data. Rule 2. Ensure proper sequencing of the flight plan, thus monitor the to waypoint. In navigation mode, a to waypoint is sequenced when it is overflown. In heading mode, if the cross-track is large, the flight plan sequencing does not occur, which ruins the FM predictions. Principle, more specifically in heading mode, monitor the 2 waypoint and clear the undesired 2 waypoints, here LACU. Rule 3. Keep a flight plan discontinuity only when desired, for example when a radar vectoring is expected. Rule 4. Anticipate your actions on the MCDU. Fly ahead of the aircraft. Whenever useful information is known, ATIS on ground, an alternative clearance is expected, or a circling is planned, insert it in the MCDU as soon as time allows it. Rules regarding predictions. Rule 1. For predictions on time, speed, altitude and fuel, the FMS assumes that the aircraft flies along the flight plan in managed navigation and managed climb or descent modes. If selected heading track, open climb or vertical speed modes are used, the FMS assumes an immediate return toward the flight plan according a realistic trajectory. Note, VDEV on the prog page follows the same assumption. Rule 2. Use of vertical deviation. The vertical deviation is provided in descent as a round symbol, yo-yo, and along a VDEV scale in approach, brick, where 1 dot represents 100 feet. It represents the vertical deviation between the current altitude and the computed descent or approach path. Rule regarding the guidance. Rule 1. Managed modes availability. The managed modes of the FG guide the aircraft along the FMS lateral and vertical flight plan. The speed target may be either managed, computed by the FMS, or selected by the pilot on the FCU. Climb and descent modes correspond to a managed trajectory and cannot be engaged in heading or track mode.
Rule 2. Re-engagement of nav mode. Nav mode may be armed at any time when heading or track mode is used for flight plan interception. The interception can occur only if the track crosses the active leg before the 2-way point. Note, nav mode engages as soon as the aircraft is less than 1 nautical mile from the interception point.
When the track line does not cross the active leg, the interception will not occur. Rules regarding the displays. Rule 1. ND displayed mode selection. The ND arc and rose navigation modes may be used without any restriction if GPS is primary or FM navigation accuracy check is positive. If the FM accuracy check is negative, raw data has to be displayed on the ND. Rule 2. FMS monitoring in managed modes. When navigation mode is used, monitor PFD FMA for mode status, armed or engaged, and monitor ND for the expected trajectory and cross-track. When climb or descent modes are used, monitor target altitude and target speed, monitor VDEV in descent and location of pseudo waypoints on ND. The autopilot, AP, flight director, FD, and auto thrust, ATHR, are all integrated within the flight guidance, FG. They operate in various modes so as to guide the aircraft to associated targets, such as speed, heading, glide slope, or FMS lateral flight plan.
An FG mode and its associated target are managed when the FG guides the aircraft along the flight plan, or when the aircraft flies a speed profile computed by the FMGS.
In this example, navigation mode is the managed lateral mode, which allows the FG to guide the aircraft along the lateral flight plan. Climb mode is the managed vertical mode, which guides the aircraft along the vertical flight plan.
An FG mode and its associated target are selected when the FG guides the aircraft to a target selected by the pilot on the FCU.
In this example, heading mode is the selected lateral mode and open descent is the selected vertical mode. The pilot can engage selected modes by pulling the corresponding selection knobs on the FCU. The pilot can engage the managed modes by pushing the appropriate selection knobs on the FCU. When selected by the pilot on the FCU, the speed target is used by the autopilot flight director or autothrust as a constant target and is indicated in blue on the PFD. When managed by the FMS, the speed target is automatically adjusted by the FMS according to the speed profile computed. The speed target is indicated in magenta on the PFD. The autopilot flight director and autothrust are integrated, which means that there is an interaction between autopilot flight director vertical modes and autothrust modes. When the autopilot flight director pitch or vertical mode controls a vertical trajectory, the autothrust controls the speed or Mach. Note, if both autopilot flight director are off, the autothrust controls the speed. Autopilot flight director controls a vertical trajectory. Vertical speed, or flight path angle, alt or alt star, descent on geometric segment, glide slope or glide slope star, final approach. Autothrust is in speed or Mach mode. When the autopilot flight director pitch or vertical mode controls a speed or Mach target, the autothrust controls a fixed thrust level. Autopilot flight director controls a speed target by adjusting the aircraft pitch in open climb or climb, open descent, take off and go around in SRS, speed reference system. Autothrust is in thrust mode. As a general rule, the FG guides the aircraft along the flight plan when managed modes are engaged, along the primary lateral flight plan in navigation mode, along the primary vertical flight plan in climb-descent modes. The aircraft will climb or descend, satisfying all altitude and speed constraints.
The constraints defined in the vertical flight plan are related to the lateral flight plan. If the pilot chooses to fly away from the lateral flight plan in heading or track modes, the climb or descent modes are no longer available, reversion modes, and the constraints are disregarded.
The navigation mode is the lateral managed mode, which guides the aircraft on the active leg defined by the from and the to waypoints.
The nav mode engages automatically after takeoff. It may be armed or engaged at any time in flight by pushing the heading knob on the FCU. When nav is engaged, The lateral flight plan is displayed as a green solid line on the MD.
When flying away from the lateral flight plan, heading mode, the pilot can resume the normal navigation by pushing the heading selector, arming navigation. Condition: the track line must intercept the active leg. If the pilot arms navigation, navigation is displayed in blue on the FMA. An intercept point is computed, and the flight plan display changes from dotted line to green solid line.
In order to follow a vertical profile, the pilot can pull the Alt selector knob to engage open climb, open descent selected modes, push the Alt selector knob to engage climb descent managed modes. If the lateral navigation mode is already engaged, select a target vertical speed or flight path angle by pulling the vertical speed knob.
The open climb mode is a selected mode. It uses the autopilot flight director pitch mode to maintain a speed Mach, managed or selected, while the autothrust maintains climb thrust. Open climb is automatically engaged when the lateral flight plan is lost. The climb mode of autopilot flight director is a managed mode. It adjusts the pitch of the aircraft so as to climb towards a target altitude. This at a target speed with a fixed thrust level controlled by the autothrust in thrust mode. Climb is automatically engaged at acceleration altitude.
In climb mode, altitude constraints related to waypoints will be taken into account. Constraints can be respected or missed. Climb is always associated to Alt mode. Alt is displayed in blue if no altitude constraint is associated. Alt is displayed in magenta if an altitude constraint is associated to a waypoint. A magenta level off arrow indicates where the aircraft will reach the constraint altitude. A blue start of climb arrow indicates where the aircraft will resume the climb once the waypoint is sequenced.
The descent mode of the autopilot flight director guides the aircraft along the FMS computed descent path so as to descend to the FCU selected altitude. The descent path includes several segments. From top of descent to first constraint waypoint, idle segment, several geometric segments computed up to reaching 1,000 feet with V-approach. The descent mode guides the aircraft along the pre-computed trajectory with speed target managed. A target speed range indicates to the pilot the acceptable speed variations required to track the descent path. A vertical deviation symbol is also displayed on the altitude scale, with digital value provided on the prog page. If the aircraft is above the flight path, the descent mode will command a pitch down to recover the FMS descent path. This symbol indicates where the descent path will be recovered, assuming that half speed brakes will be extended. If the aircraft is below the flight path, the descent mode will maintain the current speed or lower limit of the speed range until the descent path is recovered. Thrust might be added to recover the descent path. Descent mode respects the altitude, speed constraints when feasible. Altitude is armed in magenta, and target altitude is magenta if the FCU altitude is set lower than the constraint. If the altitude is set higher, then altitude and target altitude are displayed in blue.
If heading or track mode is engaged, navigation managed mode is lost, and the descent mode reverts to vertical speed, or flight path angle mode. The aircraft continues its descent with the same vertical speed or flight path angle towards the FCU selected altitude, disregarding any altitude constraints.
When the aircraft reaches cruise flight level, as set on prog page, the autopilot flight director goes into altitude cruise mode. The target Mach number is the Econ Cruise Mach number. If the aircraft is cleared by ATC at a level different from the one inserted on the prog page, altitude will be displayed on PFD. It is recommended to update the cruise flight level on the prog page to the new value for flight efficiency. The runway mode provides lateral guidance orders during takeoff, roll, and initial climb out, up to 30 feet, if a lock signal is available. Provided V2 is inserted in the perf page and slats are extended, the Speed Reference System, SRS, will engage automatically at power application, flex or toga. Speed Reference System is a vertical mode which controls the pitch and maintains the speed at V2 plus 10 knots as a minimum, or V2 in case of engine failure, up to acceleration altitude. Navigation engages automatically around 30 feet, provided a flight plan has been inserted with runway and SID. At thrust reduction altitude, lever climb flashes. The pilot must set the thrust levers in the climb detent. At acceleration altitude, the FG provides a pitch down in order to ease the acceleration towards the initial climb speed of 250 knots. Speed Reference System is replaced by climb mode.
Precision approaches can be flown using selected modes, managed modes, where autopilot flight director provides guidance laterally and vertically.
The FMGC provides automatic guidance on the localizer and glide slope, provided ILS approach has been selected in the flight plan using the arrival lateral revision, or the ILS frequency and course have been inserted through the radio navigation page. The localizer can be intercepted in heading or in navigation mode. If the interception is completed in navigation mode, accuracy must be checked high, unless GPS is primary. Lock and glide slope can be armed using the approach mode push button, provided the ILS and radio altimeter are not faulty, the aircraft is above 400 feet, ILS frequency and course are set identically on both receivers. When the localizer is captured, lock star mode engages. Once the aircraft is established on the localizer axis, lock mode engages. The localizer is intercepted before the glide slope. When the glide slope is captured, glide slope star mode engages and switches to glide slope mode when the aircraft is established. As a general rule, glide slope star and glide slope will engage only if lock star or lock is engaged. Note: glide slope star and glide slope may engage before lock star for certain aircraft, if required by the airline. In case of ILS ground transmitter failure, autopilot flight director remains in lock glide slope modes. The localizer and glide slope deviations are lost and the flight director bars flash. In case of dual receiver failure, lock and glide slope reverts to heading vertical speed. The APs trip off and the ILS scales are removed. In this case, interrupt the approach unless you have the runway in sight. Land mode engages automatically when the aircraft is below 400 feet and lock and glide slope are engaged. The input on the FCU are then no longer taken into account by the FG. Land mode can only be disengaged by a go-around. At 40 feet RA, the flare mode engages. At 30 feet, if the autopilot is engaged, Autopilot Flight Director guides the aircraft on the runway center line and provides the required pitch attitude for the flare. If autothrust is active, thrust reduction is activated and a retard call-out is activated at 10 feet. An auto-land red warning will be triggered below 200 feet radio altimeter if both APs trip off, or excessive deviations in lock above 15 feet or glide slope above 100 feet occur, or the lock signal is lost above 15 feet or glide slope above 100 feet, or a difference between both radio altimeter indications occurs.
Non-precision approaches can be flown using selected modes, managed modes where Autopilot Flight Director provides guidance laterally and vertically. The use of track flight path angle is highly recommended. The managed mode can be used if the approach is defined in the database. The type of approach must be inserted in the flight plan, and nav aids with related course must be tuned manually through the RADNAV page.
Navigation accuracy must be cross-checked using raw data information versus the FMS position, unless GPS primary is displayed. If navigation accuracy is cross-checked low, the approach must be flown using selected modes, heading vertical speed or track flight path angle. Pushing the approach push button on the FCU will arm the lateral mode. Approach navigation and final are displayed in blue on the FMA. If navigation mode was already engaged, approach navigation engages immediately. If the interception is completed using heading or track modes, the track line must intercept the active leg. Approach navigation will engage when the intercept conditions are met. Note: do not forget to clear all remaining waypoints which do not belong to the approach. Final approach engages when the aircraft intercepts the descent profile. The final guides the aircraft on the profile down to MDA or MDH. A VDEV symbol shows the deviation from the pre-planned descent path. The final approach disengages if heading, vertical speed or track flight path angle modes are engaged, or if the pilot pushes the lock push button. The final approach mode disengages and the autopilot disconnects when reaching MDH, MDA minus 50 feet or 400 feet above ground level if MDH, MDA was not entered. Raw data information using VOR, ADF needles must be displayed to cross-check lateral deviation. Revert to heading track in case of excessive deviation. If during approach GPS primary is lost, a triple click oral warning is triggered, and so you must cross-check your navigation accuracy. One aspect of the FMGS is the assistance provided to the pilot to keep the flight safe and within the flight envelope. This assistance covers the engine failure compensation, the low speed protections, the autopilot flight director mode reversions. Let's look at some of these protections in detail. In case of an engine failure with autopilot on, the FMGC ensures an automatic yaw compensation in all modes. This is achieved by the FAC, using the yaw damper at takeoff and go-around and the automatic rudder trim in all modes. Furthermore, the autopilot flight director speed reference system pitch mode automatically adjusts the reference target guidance speed in case of an engine failure at takeoff or go-around.
Low speed protection is achieved by the following features: the auto thrust speed mode, the low energy warning, the alpha floor protection, the wind shear protection.
When the autothrust is on and in speed mode, if the speed target is selected by the pilot on the FCU and the speed target is below VLS, the autothrust will not allow the speed to decrease below VLS.
If, for any reason such as turbulence, shear, auto thrust off, the airspeed drops significantly below VLS, an aural warning,
speed, speed, speed,
is automatically triggered by the FAC and is repeated every 5 seconds. It drives pilot's eyes to the speed scale so as to manually increase the thrust and in order to regain a positive flight path angle through the pitch control. An energy level is computed by the FAC, taking into account the horizontal deceleration rate and the current flight path angle. This explains the low energy warning. This warning is triggered in deceleration phase between 100 feet and 2,000 feet radio altimeter, and in configuration 2, 3 or full, and just before alpha floor detection. Note: the low energy warning is inhibited in case of GPWS alert, or an alternate law or indirect law, or if both radio altimeters fail. If the airspeed continues to drop below the low energy warning and the angle of attack increases above a given threshold, the alpha floor function of the auto thrust is triggered. This inhibits also the low energy warning. The auto thrust commands full thrust, that is, toga thrust. The angle of attack threshold, which triggers the alpha floor protection, is processed by the FAC as a function of aircraft's parameters such as configuration, deceleration rate. When alpha floor is triggered, auto thrust is turned on, if it was previously off, indicated by a white THR on the FMA. Alpha floor in green is displayed as the auto thrust mode. The alpha floor function is available from liftoff down to 100 feet radio altimeter. Note: the alpha floor protection is lost in case of combinations of failures, or at least one thrust lever instinctive disconnect push button is pressed for more than 15 seconds. The alpha floor protection is also lost in case of engine out, when slats flaps are extended, or an alternate law, or indirect law.
When exiting the alpha floor conditions, the autothrust mode reverts to toga lock mode, which indicates that toga thrust is locked regardless of thrust lever position. To regain thrust control, you have to switch off the autothrust. You now have manual control of the thrust. You may re-engage the autothrust when convenient.
If the aircraft encounters wind shear conditions detected by the FAC, a red wind shear message is triggered for a minimum of 15 seconds on both PFDs, associated with an aural warning.
wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
This reactive wind shear warning is available from 3 seconds after liftoff up to 1,300 feet at takeoff, and from 1,300 feet down to 50 feet during landing, and with at least conform selected.
The FMGC provides the following protections against wind shear. At takeoff and go-around, with the Autopilot Flight Director Speed Reference System vertical mode, which commands a pitch, ensuring a minimum positive rate of climb despite a potential speed drop. In approach, with the ground speed mini function, the managed speed target in approach is automatically adjusted with wind variations so as to ensure that the aircraft ground speed does not drop below a minimum value. Note, if the angle of attack gets too high and reaches the fly-by-wire angle of attack protection, the autopilot disengages. The fly-by-wire maximum angle of attack protection assists the pilot to best react. Let's now review the mode reversions of Autopilot Flight Director and Auto Thrust. The mode reversions are automatic mode changes which allow a comprehensive auto-flight system behavior when the pilot modifies a target on the FCU, happen in case of loss of navigation mode, ensure a flight envelope limit speed protection. Let's review the reversion due to FCU altitude changes. Autopilot is on. Suppose we are in climb, using either open climb or climb to flight level 250 as cleared by ATC. While crossing flight level 225, ATC requires us to level off at flight level 220. We therefore select the FCU target altitude to flight level 220. The Autopilot Flight Director vertical mode reverts to vertical speed on the current vertical speed value. Notice also that altitude blue is not armed. It is then up to the pilot to decide how to regain flight level 220. By dialing the desired vertical speed target, i.e. down to minus 1,000 feet, or by pulling the altitude selector to engage open descent. Note, you can imagine the same scenario in descent.
Let's see another case. We are now capturing the target altitude, Alt star green. The ATC clears us back, up to flight level 250.
We therefore select the FCU altitude target to flight level 250. The Autopilot Flight Director vertical mode reverts once again to vertical speed, with the current vertical speed value. It is now up to the pilot to decide how to regain altitude target. By pulling the altitude selector to engage open climb, or by dialing the desired vertical speed target, i.e. up to plus 1,500 feet. These are the essential mode reversions linked to FCU target changes which you may have to make in case of ATC late clearances. They ensure no discontinuity in aircraft behavior and leave you full authority to satisfy these clearances. Let's review the reversion mode due to the loss of navigation mode. Suppose we are in climb using climb to flight level 150 as cleared by ATC. While reaching flight level 90, ATC requires us to turn to heading 340. We therefore select the FCU target heading to 340. The Autopilot Flight Director vertical mode reverts from climb to open climb, as the lateral mode navigation is replaced by heading. The aircraft pitch behavior is unchanged. Note, If an altitude constraint was targeted with climb mode, it reverts to the FCU selected altitude when open climb mode engages. We have seen the loss of navigation mode in climb. On the right side of the screen, you can review a similar scenario in descent. When heading mode is engaged, which causes the loss of navigation mode, descent mode reverts to vertical speed mode, with the current vertical speed value, and speed mode engages on autothrust. The aircraft pitch behavior is unchanged. Note, the loss of navigation mode may be caused by a flight plan discontinuity. We will now study the mode reversion when the flight director orders are not followed. Manual flight. Suppose the aircraft is manually flown with flight director on, autopilot off. The current vertical mode is open descent and the autothrust mode is thrust idle. In order to demonstrate the next reversion, the aircraft is pitched up, disregarding the flight director orders given by the flight director bars. The speed decreases.
Both FDs disengage when the airspeed reaches VLS-2 knots. But if speed breaks are extended, the FDs disengage between VLS-2 knots and VLS-19 knots, depending on the speed break's position. The auto thrust effective reverts from thrust idle to speed, and the thrust is readjusted to recapture the target speed.
Let us see another case. This time we are in climb with thrust climb, open climb modes engaged. For any reason, we do not hand fly the flight director pitch bar, and we pitch the aircraft down. The speed increases.
Both FDs disengage when the airspeed reaches Vmax plus 4 knots. The auto thrust effective reverts to speed and the thrust is reduced to recapture the target speed. Note, depending on the aircraft configuration, Vmax can be VMO, VLE or VFE. The flight envelope limit speed protection with flight director on, autopilot off, is done by autopilot or auto thrust mode reversion so that at minimum speed or at maximum speed, the flight director bars are removed. Therefore, the auto thrust reverts to speed auto thrust mode in order to regain target speed.
Both FMGCs exchange data through a cross-talk bus and are synchronized. When both FMGCs cross-talk, they are in dual mode of operation. The FMGC which drives the synchronization is called master. The master FMGC is automatically determined by the engagement status of the autopilot flight director. If autopilot 1 is on, FMGC 1 is master. If autopilot 2 is on, FMGC 2 is master. If autopilot 1 plus 2 and or flight director 1 plus 2 are on, FMGC 1 is master. Here, FMGC 1 is the master as autopilot 1 is on. The autothrust is driven by the master FMGC. Note, when flight director 1 plus 2 are on, each FMGC drives its flight director and FMA on its on-side PFD.
If the crosstalk is lost between both FMGCs, each FMGC operates independently. This mode of operation is called independent mode. The crew is advised by a message on the scratch pad, independent operation. Notice the independent amber light on each MCDU which indicates that the on-side FM has detected an independent mode of operation.
In independent mode, each FMGC drives its own FG, Autopilot Flight Director, its own EFIS, PFD, ND, and its own MCDU. The crew must make the same entries on each MCDU in order to have the same guidance orders for both Autopilot FDs and the same information displayed on EFIS and on MCDU. When the crosstalk is recovered, the FMGCs revert automatically to dual mode. Let us review the failure of one FMGC. FMGC 1, for example. Let's assume we are in flight and no previous faults have occurred.
If Autopilot 1 and Auto Thrust were engaged, Auto Flight, AP off and Auto Thrust off are triggered on ECAM. AP1 and Auto Thrust go off. Note: you can re-engage the AP on the healthy side, in our case, AP2. If Auto Thrust has disengaged, it can be re-engaged at the same time. Notice the amber FM1 light on the MCDU indicates that the on-side FM has failed.
MCDU1 is now a copy of the other MCDU with the scratchpad message OPP FMGC in process. This mode of operation is called single mode. Both FMAs display to Flight Director 2, indicating that Flight Director bars on both PFDs are driven by FMGC 2. Additionally, only FMGC 2 position is computed and FMGC 2 tunes the offside nav aids.
As a consequence of single mode, ND1 displays set offside range mode and map not available messages as long as ND1 range and mode are not set identically to those of ND2. Here, the captain's ND has to be set to the same range as the first officer's ND in order to be able to display navigation map. If you cannot insert any data into the scratchpad, nor change any MCDU page, the MCDU is locked. Such a failure is not automatically detected. To recover the faulty MCDU, simply pull the related circuit breaker, then, after 10 seconds, push it back. The same procedure would apply in case of a MCDU failure indicated by the amber annunciator. Fail? On the MCDU itself. You can try to recover the faulty MCDU by simply pulling the related circuit breaker, then, after 10 seconds, by pushing it back. In case of failure of both FMGCs, a navigation mode is still available to the crew using the MCDUs and the IRS plus GPS. It is called the navigation backup, or nav backup. This nav backup is possible thanks to the continuous downloading of the flight plan from the FMGCs to their related MCDUs. The selection of the nav backup prompt on the MCDU menu pages activates the mode. When activated, the nav backup provides aircraft position, flight plan display on ND, and automatic waypoint sequencing, bearing from aircraft present position to waypoint, and related distance, true track, time estimate and distance between waypoints, total time and distance to destination, limited direct-to-function, APFD selected modes. Notes: for navigation purposes, it is recommended to use track FPA. At least one FG must be available to engage AP and auto thrust. On each MCDU, time estimates are computed using the current ground speed from the on-site IRS. But the nav backup is a limited navigation mode, and the following features are not available anymore: navigation database, performance database, most of predictions, NavAids auto-tuning, automatic landing elevation selection, managed modes of APFD, crosstalk between MCDUs. As the FMs are lost, the auto-tuning of the NavAids is also lost. This is why the NavAids must be manually tuned using the RMPs. As the databases are lost, the landing elevation has to be manually adjusted, and the optional data display push buttons of the FS control panels are now inoperative. Moreover, as we have seen previously, the crosstalk is also lost. This means that each and every flight plan modifications have to be done on both MCDUs. When activated, the nav backup can be deactivated by selecting the Deselect Nav Backup prompt on the MCDUs, or automatically, if an FM source change occurs, or by selecting an FM subsystem on the MCDU menu page. Let's have a closer look at the available MCDU pages. We will start with the backup flight plan. This page is accessed by pushing the flight plan key once the nav backup is activated. There, we can find, for each waypoint of the flight plan and displayed on lines 1 to 5, the waypoint's ident and its coordinates, the true track and the distance between two consecutive waypoints, the time to go, the time between the aircraft and the given waypoint. Note: the information given for the two waypoint is between the aircraft and the two waypoint, not between the from and two waypoints. Moreover, the backup flight plan page shows the bearing between the aircraft and the two waypoint. On line 6, we have data related to the destination airport, the airport's ident and its coordinates, the distance to destination, the direct distance from the aircraft to the two waypoint plus the along flight plan distances down to the destination airport, the time to go, distance to destination divided by ground speed. There are no lateral or vertical revision pages on nav backup. Each revision is made on backup flight plan itself. Remember that the nav database is lost. This means that no place-bearing fixes, PB waypoints, nor place-bearing distance fixes, PBD waypoints, can be inserted in the flight plan. In fact, a waypoint can only be inserted by writing its coordinates. The ident of the waypoint is then automatically generated using the above-mentioned coordinates. The backup flight plan for direct-to-functions is called by pushing the dir key while nav backup is active and the aircraft position is valid. It allows the selection or the insertion of the desired waypoint. The information given for each waypoint is the same as the one found on backup flight plan. The backup progress page is accessed by pushing the prog key once the nav backup is activated. This page displays, on line 1, the ident of the last sequence waypoint and the altitude at which the sequencing was done. On line 2, the bearing, distance and time to go to a waypoint entered by the crew. On line 3, the navigation mean used by the MCDU. GPS nav, default if a GPS is installed. IRS only nav, GPS installed, but data not available, nothing if a GPS is not installed. On line 4, the current aircraft position based on the navigation mean in use and the ground speed from the selected IRS. On line 5, the desired track from the backup flight plan active leg and the actual track from the selected IRS, On line 6, the access to the on-site backup IRS page and to the backup GPS page. The GPS prompt does not show if a GPS is not installed. Here is an example of a backup IRS. This page displays, from line 1 to 5, the current aircraft position, true track, ground speed, true heading, magnetic heading, wind true direction and velocity, GPIRS accuracy and GPIRS current position. Notice that the GPIRS fields will be dashed if the GPS information is not available and blanked if a GPS is not fitted. Line 6 allows to go back to backup progress or to toggle between the on-site backup IRS and backup IRS 3. MCDU1 gives access to backup IRS 1 and backup IRS 3, whereas MCDU2 gives access to backup IRS 2 and backup IRS 3. Here is an example of a backup GPS. This page displays, from line 1 to 3, the current GPS position, true track, UTC, ground speed, figure of merit, altitude, mode of operation and number of currently tracked satellites. Line 5 allows the deselection of the GPS for the nav backup, but not for the regular FM navigation. Line 6 allows to go back to backup progress. 2 new scratch bad messages can appear on the MCDUs while using the nav backup mode. IRS-only navigation, it indicates that the GPS is lost, not displayed in case of a manual deselection of the GPS. GPS nav avail, it indicates that the GPS is recovered, not displayed in case of a manual selection of the GPS.